Morning, everybody, and welcome to our next live speaker webinar. The title of this one is A Career in Law. My name's Helen Treadwell, and I'm Education Development Officer at Leicestershire Cares. Leicestershire Cares are a small charity in the centre of Leicester, and my job is to link businesses with schools to help children with their maths, English, and employability skills. So I'll shortly will hand you over to Kimbra and Sylvia, who both work for Knights PLC. And they'll tell you about themselves, who they work for, what their job role is, how they got to do what they do. But I'd like to say first, I encourage you to ask questions. So there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. If you want to type a question after Kimbra or Sylvia has spoken, they'll answer your questions, and we'll also come back at the end when everybody's spoken to have some questions. So I'll hand you over to Sylvia, who's going to speak first. So thanks, Sylvia. Morning.
No, hi, thanks, Helen. Morning, everyone. So yeah, as Helen said, my name's Sylvia, and I'm a recently qualified solicitor at a firm called Knights PLC. Knights has about 12 offices around the UK, although we keep growing, so can't keep track. And I'm based in their Leicester office at the moment in the city centre, although as you can see, we're still working from home. So the Speedy Speakers team asked me if I'd like to be part of today's session, and I jumped at the chance really because despite it actually being quite a long time ago, it doesn't feel all that long ago that I was in the same position as you are. I remember wondering at least what a career in law might be like. So for the next couple of minutes, I'll explain what being a lawyer involves for me, the different paths you can take to get there, because there are quite a lot, and whether it's really as glamorous as it looks on TV. So at Knights, we do commercial law, and commercial law basically means anything but criminal law. So instead of sort of the criminal law side of things, our clients are individuals or companies that come to us for help with legal issues they might be having. So this could range from, a supermarket chain that needs help claiming a debt back from the supplier, for example. It might just be the admin that comes with buying a house, or supporting someone to work out if they should buy shares in a company, to be honest, or even the whole company, just by looking at that company's accounts. So, really varied, and there's a real wide variety of ways you can get involved. So before I go further, I should probably explain that for those people who decide they do want to do what's called practicing law, there's sort of two main roles you can have. So you can either choose to become a solicitor or a barrister. And put really simply, barristers represent clients in court through effective public speaking and advocacy skills, while solicitors work more behind the scenes, and we tend to stay out of the courts and employment tribunals. Employment tribunals is just the sort of fancy word for employment court. So Kimbra's going to be speaking a little bit later, are solicitors, although Kimbra also sits as an employment tribunal judge part-time, but she's going to go into a bit more detail about that and talk about her experiences. So barristers, on the other hand, they're the ones that you see on TV, sometimes wearing the wigs, although that's more in the criminal courts nowadays, and just generally giving off an air of confidence. But if you don't fancy either of those, and are still interested in working in the sort of legal sector, there are lots of other roles you can have, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. So once they've completed their studies, most solicitors, like Kimbra and I, will have then gone on to do 2 years worth of training, sort of hands-on training in a firm, before they then can qualify as a lawyer. Some of you, depending on how much research you've done so far, might be familiar with the term training contract. So that is basically what we call that sort of 2-year period of training in-house, sitting at a desk in the firm, being one of their employees. A bit more about me. So I qualified into the employment team at Knights in October last year. So it's all still quite fresh. But I did my 2 years training at Knights, so I sort of knew everyone that I was qualifying into the team of, which was lovely. And we work for companies, HR departments, and employees as well, just trying to resolve all the issues that they face to do with their work. So the other thing I was going to say was that, one thing that's really fab about the legal sector itself is there are so many different routes into it, and it means that there's usually something to suit everyone's individual circumstances. So say, for example, whether you want to study part-time and work at the same time, whether you just want to get all the studying over and done with, and get sort of towards that qualified solicitor or barrister goal as quickly as you can. There's something for everybody. So the next question that Helen and Fiona asked us to prepare, or at least talk about, was how did you get into your role or career, and just a bit more about the route that you took. So my route to becoming a solicitor wouldn't actually be considered the sort of traditional one, but I think it's becoming more and more common. As I said before, there are plenty of different pathways, and the one that most people think of studying is studying law at university, then being offered a job as a trainee with a firm or a company to do what I was talking about before, that 2-year training contract, and then qualifying. That's probably the fastest way to qualify. In my experience, though, and I hope this is reassuring for any of you that are sort of umming and ahhing over whether to study law at university or for your A levels, or to do something else and maybe think about doing law later on, is that actually your sort of career, the studying aspect, doesn't have to start with a law degree at university, and that's because of what's called the GDL. So it's a conversion course. The GDL stands for Graduate Diploma in Law, and completing it means that you're basically considered as having studied as much law as a law graduate. And it means you can study any undergraduate course. It doesn't matter where you come from in terms of studying area. So it could be, the usual archaeology to zoology, and I did languages. So then all you need to do after you pass the GDL is well, obviously you need to take the next step, and that might be could be a master's degree in a more specific area of law, or beginning that 2-year training contract. But as I say, it's just sort of more of a roundabout route, and it lets you, try out something that, say, you really enjoyed maths at school or college, and you want to do that for a bit more time, and then look at the law side of things. There's nothing stopping you doing that. You don't have to study a law degree to then become a lawyer. Only thing I was going to mention on that one as well is that I expect training contracts are probably a long way off in the future for the vast majority of you, so I won't go into any great detail on those. You can start to apply for those from the beginning of your second year at university. Or at least that was the case when I was at university. That might have changed slightly since then, but to be honest, only a really small percentage of lawyers do it this way. Benefit being that if you impress a firm or a company enough at that point, the bigger businesses will offer you a training contract for the future once you finish your university degree, and also cover the costs of the GDL and the LPC that I mentioned before. They often, which is fab, give you what's essentially spending money. You can put it towards whatever you want. It's just a sort of grant that they give you. And it's normally a sort of couple of £1,000. And so you can see the attraction for students, for yourselves and your parents or guardians. And that's why people who manage to secure them get to brag about it. And I think because there's quite a lot of talk about it, you think, gosh, everyone does this, but it's by no means the norm, and I don't think it's the vast majority. So don't worry if you're applying to lots of firms for training contracts in the future and getting lots of rejections. It's not the way I went about it, and I don't think it's the way the vast majority end up becoming practicing solicitors. So I mentioned the LPC. Those letters stand for Legal Practice Course. It's the last university course that everyone has to complete, and it goes into a bit more detail on the sort of hands-on aspects of being a lawyer. So things like drafting wills. It might be when you learn about how sorting out mortgages and sort of everything to do with buying a house, as I mentioned before. Working out whether shares in a company is a good investment for someone just by looking at their accounts. And it even goes, it ranges so far up to the steps you need to take if you need to make someone bankrupt. So it's a really good course. You get more of an idea of what life as a lawyer is like once you've done that, or once you've had a bit of experience with the firm. And you can study the LPC full-time or part-time. So I studied it part-time over 2 years, whilst also working at Knights as a paralegal, which worked really well for me. It just meant I could get some experience of what it would actually be like to be a lawyer whilst doing all the studying. So as I mentioned, you can study part-time, as I did, and it just is a really good way of gaining lots of relevant legal experience and getting to know how the office works, because it might be the first time you've ever worked in an office, things like that. So another option to become a lawyer, which I think is relatively new on the scene, so I don't have a great deal of information about it, but I can go away and give some more information to Helen and Fiona if that's helpful, but is what's called a training apprenticeship. So that lasts 7 years, and as far as I know, you can begin that as soon as you finish your A levels or excuse me, or college studies, and that's a really great way of getting real lawyer experience almost from day one, and earning money the whole way through you do all the necessary studying. But as I say, it's called the training apprenticeship, and that one lasts 7 years. So the next question was, what are your main duties and responsibilities in your role? So last time I gave this talk, I was a trainee, so I was still in that 2-year period. And since then I've qualified back in October. And so the responsibility that I've got has kind of stepped up a level, which is fine. I'm really enjoying it, but it is quite a big step up to then be responsible for your own clients. So I have a small number of, I say my own clients, I'm their sort of contact with Knights. But on a day-to-day level, I would say the vast majority of what I do is supporting the rest of the team on the matters that they work with for their clients. So, I have qualified, but there's still a lot to learn. So I can have a few of my own clients, but mainly it's supporting the rest of the team. And I'm just thinking day to day, I might find myself doing some research, so looking into existing laws, previous case decisions, so that we can answer queries that have come in from our clients. We do a lot of what's called HR support for companies. So that just means being on hand to advise them, support them with any issues they're having with their employees. And another big part of what we do is employment claim cases. So our clients could either be someone who, for example, feels that they've been fired without good reason or discriminated against by their employer or a fellow employee, or it could be an employer who's had a claim brought against them by an employee, and we sort of help them get through that, and sort of come to either. You can go to an employment tribunal, which is, as I said, the sort of employment court, but Kimbra will talk a bit more about that because she finds herself there 1 week every month. So the only other thing I was going to say about that is that we're quite fortunate in that we've got a Birmingham and a Nottingham office, so there's a lot of opportunity to get involved with the things that they're doing, and it just means that week to week things can be nice and varied. I think there's this, what's the word, sort of assumption, or you think that, oh gosh, being a lawyer, it's either super exciting with these international corporate deals, expensive lunches and VIP clients, or it's at the other end and really boring. But I work as a solicitor in a firm that's big but not huge, and no 2 days are ever the same. I would never say it's boring, and I really love my job, but as I say, it isn't sort of the glamorous, at least not in my experience, it's not this glamorous suits, I know I promised myself I wouldn't mention it, but sort of suits experience. And when I worked as a paralegal, I did do my fair share of the dreaded photocopying. But that said, I did get to help out drafting really passive aggressive letters and sit in on juicy client meetings. And I got to hear all sorts of gossip that I couldn't possibly repeat here. But as I say, the work that we do is really varied, and again, that's just in one firm. And on top of that, there are about 101 different areas of law, and that's if you decide to become a solicitor or barrister. I mentioned I'd touch on a few of the other jobs within the legal sector, and I'm sure Kimbra could add to this list, but some of the ones that I had a little bit of experience of when I was studying were coroners. So the coroner's office is basically, coroners run inquests in after a death where the cause of the death is unknown, or it's been a death in custody, so for example in prison. And inquests are referred to as what's called fact-finding missions. So rather than aiming to lay blame at anyone's feet or a public body, coroners can make recommendations to try and prevent the same thing happening to another person in the future. So again, that's just another thing that qualified lawyers could end up doing if they found that area interesting. Another sort of area is being a court usher, or just generally court staff. So that's just working to keep the courts running smoothly, well organized, and that's just another example. But as I say, there's plenty to suit everyone, and if you're wondering whether a career in law is for you, don't just picture the sort of solicitor or barrister routes. There are plenty of other options. So I will end with saying, the last question was just whether I had any advice or tips to consider when thinking about careers generally. So I would say, when you're thinking about careers, the best place to start is to sit down and think about what you enjoy and what you think you're good at. So I think the mistake a lot of people, and certainly I was guilty of doing it as well, I wanted to be a vet, then I wanted to be a doctor, and then just sort of ended up in law. But I thought, from what I see on TV, it looks really interesting, but actually sit down. In my case, I was terrible at chemistry, so neither of those options were going to work. I'm very allergic to rabbits, so again, never going to work. Anyway, so just sit down, make a list of what you think you're good at. You can ask your friends and family if you want a little ego boost at the same time. But I think it's just really important to think about what you're good at and what you enjoy, because at the end of the day, a lot of careers aren't what they seem on TV. And it's just worth making this list and then thinking about that, keeping it in mind when you're researching different careers. And great places to start are webinars like this. There's lots of different information out there. Just have a look at it, but while you're looking, just keep in mind, sort of, does this sound like I would be good at it? The most important thing is that you enjoy it at the end of the day, so just to bear those in mind. The only other tip I was going to suggest was just to keep a little record of what you've been up to. So both in terms of schoolwork and in your spare time, which obviously I appreciate at the moment is really limited. But it's just really good if you have a record of what you've been up to when it comes to preparing for interviews, filling out job applications, maybe doing your personal statement on UCAS. It just makes that a lot easier. Everyone's got so much going on, and it is really easy to forget the little details about some work experience that you really enjoyed, for example, or it could range from that to how an event at football practice or tennis training meant that you had to apply leadership skills. Just little things like that will make your interviews and your personal statements really stand out. For one thing, you'll find it easy to talk about them because you'll have your memory jogging notes, but also because it'll just be obvious to who you're trying to impress or, convince of your commitment to something, that you took a real interest in the subject, and that you've got the qualities they're looking for. So those are my two top tips, is just to make a list of what you're good at, keep that in mind when you're researching, and because there are so many options out there. And the other one is just to keep a little diary. It doesn't have to be in any detail, just make a note of, things that you thought, oh, actually, that might be something that comes up in an interview later. Or, I'll mention this as a sort of thing that's happened that I could call upon later on. But yeah, that's all from me. I'll hand over to Kimbra now, but as Helen and Fiona were mentioning, there's going to be a Q&A session, so more than happy to answer any questions in that later on.
Thank you, Sylvia. We have got a few questions now, if that's okay for
Yeah,
you to
that's
answer.
absolutely fine. Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
that was so informative that it's probably really hard to ask a question because you covered
That was my
everything.
aim. Yeah.
Brilliant, and it's great to hear the different ways that you can get into law and not just the
Mhm.
obvious way. So that's really good. There are a few questions that have actually been answered when you've talked, but there's one that asks about hours in your job. How many hours a day do you roughly work, and does it differ within the job that you're doing, within the role that you've got?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that solicitors' hours, generally speaking, are your usual 9 to 5, and certainly that's what's in our employment contracts. But it really varies depending on the area you work in. So, for example, the deadlines that are set in our area are set by the tribunal or the courts, for example. So, but if you work in, for example, corporate, your client can set the deadline, and also your client could be anywhere in the world. So you can find yourself with deadlines of 5 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, just because that for whatever reason is 5 p.m. somewhere else. So I would say that in employment particularly, our hours don't tend to stretch over. And if they do, it's sort of peaks and troughs. You might be really busy Monday and Tuesday, and then you finish at 5, and it's like a normal working day the rest of the week. So I would say that it's not how it looks on TV, at least in our firm. Now that might be different, but I do think corporate deals can stretch way into the night, and you can end up ordering Chinese into the office, just like you see on TV. It's not been my experience. I have to say, I don't think the latest I've ever finished, Kimberly horrified, is probably about 11 o'clock, but that was because we had just a really big set of documents to deal with the night before a tribunal deadline. So, that's the absolute worst case scenario, and it's only ever happened once in how long have I been working? About 4 years. So I don't think it's not this sort of horror, oh my goodness, I'm gonna give up my 20s, to become qualified. Now obviously that's Knights is what's called a sort of, well, it's not a regional firm, it is UK wide, but we don't have any offices within London. I think when you get up to the sort of magic circle, all the well-known names, you can end up working much longer hours. But as I say, I can't really comment. I mean, I've got a few friends that do that, and I know they do start early and finish late. But on the whole, I would say the vast majority of solicitors, it's basically 9 to 5.
Brilliant, thanks. We've got quite a few questions coming in. I'm not sure which to ask first. Um, there's one about what do you need to be interested in or enjoy? I know you said to pick like subjects that you like. What would be the sort of the main ones that you should be interested in and enjoy if you want a career in law?
That's a really good question. I would say things where you have to take information, sort of what's the word, process it in your head, and then maybe explain it in a different way or distill it down into its main points, because that's a lot of what Kimbra and I do. We might have to look into some case law or legislation, and then apply that to the questions that the clients come to us with. So things like history, English, again, neither of which I did at A level. Languages are another good one, because again, that's you taking information in, processing it in your head, and then sort of translating it then when it comes out, sort of output. I mean, anything where you use analysis, because of course we have to look at things and really analyze them. Honestly, I don't think there's an A level that wouldn't help in some way. And in terms of things to be interested in, I mean, things where you're out and about communicating with people, because that's a really big part of Kimbra and I's job is the sort of client contact aspect. Yeah, I mean, I really don't think there's certainly nothing that you could be interested in subject wise that would be detrimental, I don't think. And you can always spin it. You can always say, oh, actually, you might not think that music's useful. But I know, Kimbra, I think you did music A level, or yeah, and Kimbra's a lawyer, so it's probably helped in some way. And it's all about just the way that your brain works and the way that you apply yourself to information, I would say. But yeah, no, there's certainly nothing would be detrimental, I don't think.
That's good, because somebody's also asked about languages and can you incorporate them into law if you wanted to work in a different country? And I'm pretty sure they would be very useful for A levels, wouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the time, we might have we have a sort of internet little what would you call it, forum, and a lot of the time colleagues will post, is anybody fluent in different languages? Can anyone help with the client in Spain, Portugal, Poland, wherever it might be? So yeah, having languages, even just one language under your belt is really useful. I would say it just makes you an even more attractive applicant for companies. If and the other thing is, it might not say, for example, if your mom's Spanish or your dad's Spanish and you're bilingual, fantastic. But if as well as that, or if you don't have that sort of background, if you've gone and taken the time and dedication to learn a new language, even if you don't have to be that good at it, but if you can say, look, I had a target, and that was to become a certain level of proficiency, and I got there. Again, it doesn't actually matter that you don't know that much of the language. The fact that you've applied yourself to something shows that you're willing to do that, and you can just transplant that into your office every day.
Brilliant. I'll do one last question before we go over to Kimbra.
Sure.
I quite like this one, and we'll ask Kimbra the same question after she's spoken. What's the most memorable thing that you've done during your time as a solicitor?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. I might have to come back to you on that, actually. I'm trying to
Okay,
think.
that's fine. Do you want to think about that, and
I'll
we'll
think about
come
that.
back to
Yeah,
that
I'll
at the
think
end, because it
about
is a
it.
nice question, isn't
That's a
it,
great
for both
question.
of
I love
you?
that. Yeah, I'll have a good think.
So what I'll do at the moment, there is a few more questions, but mostly stuff that you've covered. So I'll hand over to Kimbra now to talk. Kimbra is further on in her career in Knights, and so her job's a bit different to Sylvia. So I'll pass you over to her, and we'll have some questions at the end. Thanks, Kimbra.
Take myself off mute before I start. Thanks very much, and thank you for inviting us along. We're thrilled to be here because I know I look the same age as Sylvia, but I am a bit more qualified than her because I actually qualified as a solicitor in 1992, and I bet some of you may not have even been born then, which is really, well, in fact, probably most of you weren't even born then, which is really frightening for me. But I've been a solicitor since 92, and I always wanted, I never always wanted to be a solicitor. That's absolutely not true. I had no idea. At your age, I'd have sat in this thinking, I've got no idea what I want to do. And my dad used to say, you should know. You really should know. You should have an idea and work towards it. And I always remember there was a girl who was at school with me, and she wanted to be a doctor, and she said, before even doing what I did, O-level, so before doing GCSE, she said, I'm doing all science, blah, 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 because I'm going to be a doctor, and this is the A-levels I'm going to do. She didn't even pass her O-levels, whereas I had no idea, but decided that actually I kind of muddled my way through, got to university, which I think is a great thing if you can get there. Doesn't matter what you study. And again, as Sylvia said, do what you enjoy. You'll get much better grades. And then you can decide even right at the end, because I didn't decide until I was probably in my second year of university that I actually wanted to be a solicitor. So I genuinely had no idea. The only thing I would say is I love a good argument. That's always a good sign for someone that necessarily, wants to perhaps do advocacy. And certainly I've done a bit more advocacy than Sylvia was suggesting for solicitors. I really enjoy that. But I'm also a bit nosy, so I like knowing what's going on. And so as far as people are concerned, employment to me was probably one of the best areas to qualify in law in, because there's nothing as strange as what people get up to. So I always found that really fascinating. So they're the kind of things that made me think, well, do you know what? I might decide that I'm going to be a lawyer. I have done other things as well. Because although I've always been a lawyer and I've always been interested in employment and done employment, I've also lectured on the legal practice course that Sylvia mentioned. So I did 4 years as a lecturer, which I think was good experience, but I knew I didn't want to do that forever. And then I've also then, as a lawyer, I've been a solicitor in private practice. I've been an in-house lawyer, which is where you're a solicitor, but you're in a company. So my employer then was the company. It was a PLC, and I gave advice on a lot of different matters, including employment. So that's another area that you can go to once you've qualified. And then I've obviously been a solicitor in private practice, and I'm now a partner. I'm one of 220 partners in the firm that Sylvia and I work in, where there's over 1,000 people that are employed there. So it's quite a reasonable size firm. So I'm a partner there, but that's what I do as one of my jobs. And I do, as Sylvia said earlier, I do 3 weeks of a month in that job, and then I have a week off. Now that sounds lovely, doesn't it? It would be lovely if I had a week off every 4 weeks. But in my week off, I do my other job, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about, because I'm actually a judge of the employment tribunals. And so I'm a part-time fee-paid employment judge. And what does that mean? Well, you have to be a solicitor first, which is why it's really good. And Sylvia gave a great introduction as to how you become a solicitor. Thanks for that. So you're a solicitor first. You have to be a solicitor for at least 8 years. And then you can make your application to be what the normal route is you become a fee-paid judge, which is what I am. And I applied 11 years ago, and I've been a fee-paid judge for 10, because the application process takes a year. And what you have to do when you apply for it, you have to do an exam. And actually, I took the exam, and I told all my colleagues I was taking the exam. And then I was really embarrassed after I'd done it, because I was convinced I'd failed, because it was so hard, this exam, that when I came out, and I thought, I wish I'd not told anybody. But anyway, I managed to scrape through. And then you have an assessment day where you have to do role play. So you literally are given a set of case papers just before you go in. So you might have 50 minutes to prepare. You go in for your interview, and you have to go in as if you are the judge. And I've got to say, I think I was, I literally banged the door open and presented myself, and I'm Employment Judge Welsh, and carried on. And I didn't realise until the second role play that, they said before I started, oh, before you start, can we just introduce ourselves? And I've done none of that. So do take keys if you get in interviews, take kind of some kind of feedback from the people that are interviewing you, just to see whether you should jump straight in like I did. But anyway, I managed to get appointed, and I've been a judge for 10 years. So what does that mean? It means I'm employed by the Ministry of Justice, and I am one of approximately 200 fee-paid judges around the country, and I have to work in a region that's different to the region that I practice in as an employment lawyer. So I sit in London Central Employment Tribunal, which is really nicely positioned right near Covent Garden, if any of you like shopping in Covent Garden. The unfortunate thing is I never get to shop there, because when I go down there to do the hearings, I'm literally working from 8 in the morning until probably about 5 or 6 at night, and then I've got to get the train home. So it's quite a long day. What does the day entail? Well, I won't know what case I've got until the day of the hearing usually. And you'll go in and get your big file, and obviously your heart sinks if the file's this thick, and it lifts a little bit more if it's that thick, because you realise you've not got as much to read. But you might have a claim for things like an employee or an ex-employee might bring a claim for unfair dismissal. So if they've been sacked unfairly, like Sylvia mentioned, they'll bring a claim to a tribunal, and I would sit on the hearing to decide whether it was a fair or unfair dismissal. They might bring claims for discrimination. And if they bring claims for discrimination, so for example, they say that they've been treated unfavourably because of their race, or because of their sex, or their age, or sexual orientation. There are 9 protected characteristics for discrimination. And if they bring a claim for discrimination, then I would sit as a panel of 3 to decide a discrimination case. And the panel of 3, I would be the chairperson of the panel as the employment judge, and there will be 2 lay members. Now that means they're not legally qualified, but they can in theory outvote the judge. Got to say, it's never happened to me yet. Could do, and obviously that it would be up to them to come to their own decisions, but very often they tend to be unanimous decisions. So we'll get the file, read the papers, the parties come in, they have then arguments in front of us. By arguments, I don't mean they stand up and have a slanging match. Obviously, you have very often there's legally qualified people like Sylvia or barristers that attend the tribunal in front of me, and they will put the case, so you'll have witnesses, they'll be cross-examined. And another reason that I became I wanted to go into law, I watched a programme, so don't worry about watching television when you're at your stage, gives you good ideas about future careers. I watched a programme called Petrocelli that none of you will have heard of, and it was probably a bit rubbish, but it was an American programme where there was a lawyer in it. And I really remember thinking, I think I could do that. And that's what made me think about a career in law. That, and also my dad used to do court cases between me and my sister. He wasn't a lawyer, he was an engineer, but he used to do court cases between me and my sister where he would sit as the judge, and we'd each have the opportunity to say our arguments. You know, she's nicked my jeans, well, she nicked my nail varnish, whatever it might be. And then he would give his decision, and that was final. There was no right of appeal from my dad. So that's another reason that probably prompted me to think about either, I don't know if it made me think about being a judge, I don't necessarily think it did, but certainly it made me think about doing law. But so you'll have your case, you'll listen to it, and then what I have to do, and one of the key things of a judge, is you have to make a decision. Sounds ridiculous, but some people find that really hard, because it means you've heard different evidence, you've heard the arguments that have been put forward, and you've ultimately got to decide who you believe, and you've ultimately got to decide in the law who's right and who's wrong. And then you'll go on to deal. Say the claimant, the employee, the former employee has won, you will then go on to give a decision and decide how much money that person is awarded. And I think the biggest decision I've ever given was an award of over £100,000 plus reinstatement for an employee, and that did make the press, but for an employee in respect of unfair dismissal. And it's quite unusual because that's over the normal cap for unfair dismissal. But because I ordered reinstatement, which meant he got his job back, he also was able to get the highest sum of compensation. So I find it really interesting because you are dealing with people. For a lot of people, the employment tribunal is the only time they'll come into a court, because even if you get divorced, you may not go to court for that. And a lot of people don't bring civil claims or get involved in them, but they may have a claim to bring in respect of unpaid wages or the fact that they've been dismissed unfairly. They might, at the moment, we've got claims for people that have been put on furlough. And I'm sure you've heard that phrase. We'd never heard of it until kind of March, April time last year. That's a whole new concept that both all the lawyers have been trying to struggle with, and also all the judges are now going to get the cases that are coming through. So I've got to say, it always changes. The law is one of the areas where you do the actual law itself does not stay the same. It changes, so it makes it varied. Also, if you do employment law, it's about people. And honestly, there are some strange things that people get up to that I've seen from both sides of the bench, which always makes it quite interesting. So I deal with all kinds of employment disputes. So I think I've explained a little bit about how I got into my role and career, and I've been in it for 10 years now. Some people move from being a fee-paid judge to being a salaried judge. That means that's the only job you do. I've not done that because I've quite enjoyed the balance doing in private practice as well as sitting as a judge. And I've got to say, when I was a trainee solicitor, so that would be in 1990 to 1992, there was a partner in the big firm that I worked for then, he was a part-time, the equivalent of a tribunal judge then. So he was a partner in the firm, and I remember thinking that would be good to do. And I think that's another reason why I decided that I would do this. So you know, I'm trying to explain a little bit about what I do. My duties and responsibilities. You need to be a good communicator, so you need to be able to explain things well, because if you've got someone that's not legally represented, you need to be able to explain to them what they need to do to be able to prove their case. And you also need, when you give a judgment, for the people to understand what you've said. So you need to have communication skills that are probably both oral and written, because our judgments all go online, so they can be searched. And that's something that obviously came about a few years ago and frightened probably most of the judges, thinking, gosh, they can now search and find all our judgments on there. So that's quite an interesting fact. But what do you have to do as well? You have to undergo ongoing training. That's both as a solicitor and also as a judge, because you've obviously got to make sure that you keep up to date. And it's really important that you do that, because you need to make sure you're applying the latest law or the latest case. And I don't know if any of you have seen it in the news, but there's been a very big decision about Uber drivers that was handed down by the Supreme Court, I think about 5 or 6 days ago now. And that is a groundbreaking case that really changes things about worker status. And that's something that you need to make sure that you keep up to date with. So you do need to keep doing research, you need to doing training, and certainly that's something that I look at. So when I'm coming to deliberate on my decisions, I'll need to check the latest case law, look at the statutes. I always call it sipping from the clear waters, because someone said that to me early in my career and I thought it sounded good. So sipping from the clear waters means reading back to the actual laws themselves, because at the end of the day, that's what we've got to apply in light of the cases that have come from it. So it's really varied. It's really demanding, and it's quite tiring, because I've got to say you have to concentrate. And before I became a judge, when I was an advocate, and I still am, but when I was an advocate, I used to think judges have it easy. They start at 10, they finish at 4 invariably, and they have an hour's lunch. I mean, what can be hard on that? But I didn't realise what you have to do as a judge, which is not just listen to the evidence and concentrate and make a good note of the evidence, because you'll need that to do your judgment. You've got to watch the room. You've got to check that witnesses aren't being coaxed. People aren't telling them what to say. You've got to make sure people are behaving in the courtroom, and they're not nodding when someone's giving evidence when they agree with it and shaking the head when they're not. The times I tell people that they're not able to do that. I am able, if I want to, and if you do remote hearings, I can mute people at my discretion. But certainly in the hearings themselves, you can also send people out of the hearing. I've never had to do it yet, but I have got the power should I wish. So luckily we've not had to come to that yet. But it's quite a varied role, and I think it's a really interesting role. But I think as far as law is concerned, there's lots of different areas you can go into. Not only is there paralegals, solicitors, legal executives, but there's also the barristers that Sylvia mentioned. And then even if you decide that you qualify in law, there's a lot of other things you can do with it, like in-house, lecturing, lots of different things. So I think that if you think you're interested, the best thing that I would suggest that you do is if you can, get some placements, because that's normally a foot in the door to try and get into a firm, but also it gives you an idea of whether you're going to enjoy it. Because one thing I would say, and again, it's a bit of advice probably from my dad from years ago, which is make sure you love your job. You spend a lot of hours in it. And if you don't love it, do something else. Now, I'm not suggesting, and I'm sure Sylvia will agree, I do not love my job every single day. There are some days when I'm not happy. On the whole, though, I've got to be honest and say I love it, both as a solicitor and as a judge. And I think if you don't, on the whole, love it, do something else. My eldest stepson was an army officer. He was a captain in the army, and he decided he wanted to be a surgeon. And he has retrained and is now qualified as a surgeon. So one thing that's changed, I think, a lot from when I was your age, you used to go into a career and stay in it forever. And that's changed. People now do move between, and that's not a hardship. And actually, I think it can mean that people bring different things to the party. So like Sylvia was saying about doing a non-law degree, that can sometimes be a good thing. Doesn't matter whether you've done a law degree or non-law degree by the time you're applying to firms like ours. So do what you're going to get the best grade in, which is normally what you enjoy and what you love. So that's my top tips. And I don't know if there's anything else you want me to cover in respect of being a judge.
That was great, Kimbra, thanks. We got loads of information from that. So we've got a lot of questions as well.
Good.
The one I'll ask the first is, you talked about being a really good communicator, always doing your research. Someone's asked, you have to be a naturally grade A student to do this job. Is it?
No,
Would you have to
no,
get
you
straight
don't
A's
have
at
to
A
be. I
level?
mean, I've got to be honest. If you're not a grade A student, it's going to be tough for you to try and get the training contracts and probably go into it with that route. But there are other routes through it. And I know some of the best lawyers that I've met have not necessarily got the best grades at degree. So, you know, you've got to be bright. You know, I would say that, although that's probably me being big-headed. I hope not. But I think you've got to be bright to do it. But I don't think you've got to be necessarily an absolute A-star student all the way through. But you've got to work hard. There's no doubt about it to get there. But I would agree with Sylvia. You know about the hours. I've never worked till 11 o'clock at night ever, and I never will. Anyway. Was there another question?
Yeah, that leads a bit on to somebody else has asked, does it depend on which university you go to whether you get offered the training contract? Is there a hierarchy, or does it?
Well, I mean, obviously, you'd aim to go to the best university you could, and a lot of people do, and some firms probably do look at certain universities like Oxbridge, Red Brick universities, etc. But I didn't go to either of those, and I've never had a problem in getting a job or a good train. I had a training contract where I was sponsored to do the pre-runner of the legal practicals, the Law Society finals, and I, as I say, I didn't go to you know, it was a good university for law, but it wasn't one of the best universities for law. So I don't think it, you know, I think a lot of it also depends on you, and I think you as an individual need to get as much experience as you can. And I think a lot of firms now look for that, as well as a good academic background. If you haven't got a good academic background, you know, you've not got A levels or you've not got a degree, then you are limited to some extent. But you know, and it may be impossible. But certainly I do think the experience, and coming on from that, I did mention the doing placements. But the other thing you can do, if you're interested in a kind of a judicial role, and they are trying to be much more inclusive in the judiciary now, so you know, for ethnic groups or women, or you know, they're trying, and also for class as well, so that people, they're trying to make sure that it's not all people that went to public schools and private schools that are necessarily getting the places for law. I certainly went to a comprehensive in Leicestershire. I did do well. I got 9 O levels and 5 A levels, and then went on to do a degree. But having said that, you know, I didn't go to anything, and certainly my university, which I loved, was not one of the top universities for law. Oh, sorry. The other thing I was going to say about being a judge: go and sit in on courts, because you've got that then very often the vast majority are in the public domain, as in they should be heard. We're meant to have open justice. That's one of the absolute key things in the judiciary. So my hearings, there's only a few that are in private. And that means that even now, at the moment, because a lot of the hearings, I'm doing remote hearings with witnesses and members and, you know, all that whole thing. You can email in to the tribunals and say, I'd like to observe a tribunal case, and they will give you the link to connect to a tribunal case. Clearly, you've got to be respectful. You can't be talking. Well, the judge will mute you or send you out if you are. But it's a really good way to see whether that kind of arena is something for you. And certainly, even when we're not in lockdown, you will be able to go and sit in the back of courtrooms, both the Magistrates' Court, the Crown Court. Tribunal is on the bottom of New Walk in Leicester. That's the Leicester Employment Tribunal, and there are you can check online as to where your local one is if you're not from Leicestershire. But that, to me, is a really good way of seeing whether you're interested.
Brilliant, thanks, Kimbra. There's one specifically for you, and then I think there's quite a few more questions that I can ask both you and Sylvia and whoever wants to answer it. But specifically for you, Kimbra, when did you decide you wanted to be a judge? At what point did you decide that you wanted to do that?
Gosh, I thought about it probably when I was a trainee, so when I was just before kind of Sylvia's level, and that was because there was this partner in that I knew that was both. And that's when I first thought about it. And then it was really when my son was probably, let me just think, he's 24 now. So he'd have been about 13, and he didn't quite need me so much. And I'd always worked part-time since he was born. And I really thought I needed a bit of a new challenge. And that's what made me think. So I was probably a good way into my career as a solicitor when I thought, actually, I think I could have a go at being a judge. But if I'm absolutely honest, I genuinely didn't think I'd get it the first time. A lot of people don't necessarily get it the first time. And I came out and I said to my husband, it was a really fair process, but I don't think I've got it. So when the letter came and said, you've been appointed, first of all, I didn't believe it. And I don't know about anybody else, but certainly I've probably got the biggest imposter syndrome of anybody. But I also know that Lady Justice Hale, Barbara Hale, who was the president and the head of the Supreme Court in all of our country, she also says that she suffers with imposter syndrome. And that's where you think, actually, should I be doing this? Am I good enough? And that's something that I think a lot of us do suffer with. But regardless of that, that's what kind of made me, I probably was about a good 15 years into having been qualified before I thought about doing it. But you do need to have some years of experience before you can apply. And I think that's right that they do that.
Brilliant, thanks, Kimbra. There was a question about the SQE exam. Someone's written, what is the SQE exam? Did you mention that, Sylvia, or was that something different?
Just unmute. So the SQE exam, I think, it's being brought in now. I didn't do it because it's that new. It's instead of the LPC that I was talking about. So once you've done either your non-law undergraduate degree or your law graduate degree, and then the conversion if you need it, instead of doing the LPC, which is a 1 year full-time, 2 years part-time, and a massive number of exams. So you'll do exams in property, litigation, which is sort of arguing court, everything. Instead of having 10 exams spread out across the year, you have this one massive exam. But I'm afraid that's probably about the extent to which I know about it. I do know that it's this sort of monster exam, but it comes after your law degree. But I don't know anything else about it because it is, as I say, I think it's so new that
I've just Googled, actually. It comes into force on the 1st of September 2021.
There we go.
The solicitors qualifying exam. So it is really new. I've got to say, I know nothing about it other than what a Google search will tell me. So it might be worth having a look on there.
Good advice, thank you. So both of you, really, what's the most interesting case you've dealt with, if you're allowed to mention it?
I think Kimbra can cover this. She's got some great anecdotes.
There's lots of cases that are interesting for different reasons. And so I've had, for example, really interesting legal cases where it's been really difficult law. I was mentioning one earlier, that one of my cases when I was a real new judge, which I should never have had, because another more senior judge had been given it, but he said he was conflicted. I think he read the papers and thought, gosh, get rid of that one. But anyway, I got it, and that went right the way up to the Supreme Court. And it was about whistleblowing, and that was probably one of the most interesting. And it's called Bates Van Winklehoff against Clyde and Co. But that's a reported decision in the Supreme Court. That's my only one that went to the Supreme Court so far. I mean, you don't want to be appealed ideally, but when you are, it just goes with the job. But I've had interesting cases for lots of other reasons, like claimants or witnesses that bang the table, or I had one witness that kept saying, oh my god, do I have to answer that? And obviously I had to keep them in check and make sure that the proceedings went on properly. And I've had some interesting cases where you see sometimes that employees, for whatever reason, have done something very strange and have lost the plot at a certain point in their life, having probably been a very good employee, and then all of a sudden they kind of lose the plot and do something very, very strange. But I won't mention any of those now.
Somebody's asked, have you been in a position as a judge where you're not sure what to do over the case? You've not come to an agreement?
Really good question. And to be honest, there are definitely I'm doing a session this afternoon for some young lawyers in our firm about litigation in the tribunals, and one of the questions that I was asked in readiness for that was, do you, and I've got it here because I'm ready to do it, do you sit and think, I don't know this? And that's kind of a similar kind of question. Yes, you do. You sometimes think, and remember that judges can be just as nervous. I used to feel sick when I started sitting. Every time I travelled down on the train to London, I used to feel sick because I didn't know what was going to be the other end and whether I'd be able to deal with it. But I've got to say, ultimately, you have to come to a decision on your judgment. So even though I've sat in a case and thought, oh, I'm not sure of this, I need to check it. So then I've gone away and done research, and I've looked at the evidence again, and I've looked at the case law, and I've looked at the statutes and the laws that apply. Ultimately, I've had to come to a decision. And I try, and one of the things I always try and do is do my best. And I like to feel that every judgment I've given, I've done it in the best to try and ensure there's no bias or even, you know, unconscious bias in respect of the decision, and making sure I've been fair. Sometimes I've felt really sorry for some of the individuals because I genuinely understand why they might have brought a claim, but applying the law, they've lost. And that's one of the difficult things that comes with a job.
Thank you. We have still got quite a few questions. What I think I'll do, I'll pick some ones that we sort of haven't gone over. And if any students have got any questions that weren't answered, is it okay if they email me with them and we'll pass them on to you? Because I don't think we're going to fit them all in this morning. But so if I'll pick a sort of 3 of the sort of ones we haven't covered as much. So advice for getting work experience or placements. Have you got any advice on that, either of you? I mean, it's difficult at the moment with the pandemic because a lot of things are remote.
It is. I mean, Sylvia's probably obtained work experience more recently than I have. Certainly, most big firms have an application process, and they may do placements, and they may only do them for people that are a certain way along in their choice of study. So they might do it for example, second year at university. And that's one thing to look out and make sure that you get your placements, because very often people are recruited from those placements. But if you know anyone that's a lawyer, or you know someone that works in a firm, you know, ask to see. Now, obviously, our firm, it's no good asking me, because our firm has its own kind of process for doing these things. But certainly that's what I would do. So, and if you've got, for example, a friend that's a solicitor in a smaller firm, you might even be able to go along for the day, or visit, you know, go alongside them when they're in court, or do something that way. So that's kind of my advice. It would be. But also, when you're doing your applications, target them. Don't do the same application to everybody that says, "Dear Sirs," that's not actually got something about what you're applying for and why you're interested in that firm, because otherwise it looks very generic. You've printed it off or emailed it, sent it to everybody, let's hope someone bites. I think you've got to think a little bit more nowadays. It's more difficult. Think a bit more about tailoring any applications that you make or approaches you make. You know, I've looked at your website and I see you do this and I'm really interested in that area of law, that kind of thing. Anything else you'd add, Sylvia?
No, I think Kimbra's absolutely right in that you should really make the most of any contacts you have. I mean, you know, even if they're really remote, just get in touch and say, look, you know, I'm really interested in a law career. I don't know any lawyers. You know, it doesn't run in the family particularly or anything like that, or, you know, neighbors or whatever like that. And just say, look, is there any chance I can come in and start low, start your bargaining low, and say, even if it's just one day, you know, next month or something like that. And, you know, if they say yes, then that's something that's better than nothing. So yeah, I would say really use your contacts. I mean, that's what I did. Our family doesn't really have any lawyer connections, but we knew an estate agent down the road, and obviously estate agents are quite tied in with lawyers. So he then knew a lawyer, and it was just a high street firm. And I just went and did that I think I spent a week of a Christmas holiday, just shadowing. It's just a really small high street firm, but it's better than nothing. And it also shows that you're willing to go the extra mile instead of going, oh, I don't know any lawyers, so I can't possibly get any work experience. It shows that you've gone, oh, hang on, no, if I actually put my mind to it and contact these 2 people, maybe it'll get me somewhere, things like that. It just really shows through on an application. But, you know, don't worry if you don't know anyone, because certainly that's how I felt. But if you just have a think about who you could know through maybe other people, things like that really work.
Brilliant, thank you. Got about 5 minutes left. So what about universities? Which university did you go to? And is it a very competitive process? I don't know if they mean to get in it or when you're there, but
Yeah,
is
well,
it as
I went to
competitive as it
Lancaster
seems?
University, which I loved. It was just brilliant. They weren't particularly wonderful for law. They were good, but they weren't wonderful. But obviously, this was 1985 to 1988, so it's some time ago. But I think, you know, that you can go to all different universities. I mean, you know, you've got to go for one that's hopefully got a good reputation for law, or a reasonable reputation for law, so it doesn't hold you back. But certainly at the time that I applied, and I bet it's a lot harder now, to do law, you had to have 3 Bs at A level. Now, I know now, I'm sure it's probably 3 A stars and 3 things on the side, and a fair wind behind you as well to get in. But yeah, no, that's what we needed at the time that I did it. What about you, Sylvia?
So I did. I didn't. I thought I wanted to be a vet, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor. Didn't do any of the A levels for either of those. And just picked my favorites, which were German and Spanish. And then I went to Nottingham Uni and did a 4-year languages course there. And it was only in the sort of last year of that I think I was in the car with my dad just having conversation. He said, you know, you might. I mean, he's probably wish he'd been a lawyer, but anyway, that might have been some of the pressure. But he said, you know, oh, what about a career in law? So I had to think about it, and I thought, actually, that does sound like it would suit me. Anyway, so I had done languages, and then I did that conversion course, and that kind of cemented the, yes, I do actually really want to give this a go. So I was quite fortunate in that, well, so I studied at Nottingham University, which is a Russell Group university, and then I went to Nottingham Trent University, and it was great because it paid me to play hockey, so, you know, it was a no-brainer for me. But anyway, on the sort of more law-specific professional side of things, they have a really good law school, so it wasn't necessarily that well known in terms of the university status, though it is getting up there, as it's obviously an old polytechnic, but the law school themselves was quite well known.
It's always had a good reputation, Nottingham
Yeah,
Trent.
hasn't it? Business
Yeah,
school as well, I think.
for law.
So that's the sort of the route I took. I mean, I think Kimbra's right in that there will be law universities that jump out when people are going through applications, but I think going back to the do you have to be a grade A student question, some people aren't, you know, before the ages of about 20. It just doesn't click together. You might exam really terribly. I know that was the case for me. I just got really stressed out about exams. I knew everything, and I knew everything, but the day of the exam I would just fall apart. And it just comes with practice, and small victories to build up your confidence. But you know, my A level results weren't, I mean, they weren't bad, but they weren't sort of, I didn't get 4 A stars or anything like that. But I think I was able to show, you know, if you're not necessarily a grade A star student, you know, build your sort of portfolio in other ways. So, you know, I played hockey. I managed to explain how leadership and working within a team was really applicable. Things like that can really help your application. So I would say Kimbra's right. You know, aim high in terms of university, but if you find yourself at a university that isn't quite as well known, just get really involved with everything that's going on. You know, so you can say, look, I made the most of it. I realized not my mistakes, but a good example is I got a 2-2 at university, but that's because I played too much hockey. You know, I left everything to the last minute. I was doing essays overnight because I'd been, you know, busy traveling up the country, Scotland, to play hockey. But you know, but what I then showed was when it came to the GDL, I had by then I turned it around and realized, look, I actually need to reduce the hockey down a bit. Yeah, work. Kimbra's right, work. But the fact that I could show that meant that actually it didn't matter so much that before. And that spoke volumes. I remember my interview for where we work now, they said, oh, you know, you haven't performed that well at your undergraduate degree. And I said, no, you know, that's the elephant in the room here in the interview, but look at how well I've done since then. And I've really applied myself, and I realized that the balance was off because I loved hockey that much anyway. But, you know, it's just better to have that real balance. So I would say, you know, aim high, but if there's reasons why you struggle academically, you know, you can address those, or, you know, boost your profile in other ways, really.
Brilliant, thanks, ladies. I'm aware of the time, and I don't want to suddenly get cut off. So I won't ask another question, but maybe as we go off, just one last quick main tip from both of you, just really quickly, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, mine's probably do what you love.
Yeah.
You'll do better. You'll do better, and you'll get better grades if you do what you love.
Yeah, and I think my main tip, I know I mentioned it before, is really keep a record, because when you come to do applications or you sit down to prep for an interview, if you've got nothing, it's so much harder, and it's also so much harder to then convince the interviewer that you really want it. Whereas if you've got, you know, a diary or a notebook and you think, oh, I did all of these things on that week's work experience, and you can talk at length about them, it'll help you with your confidence too, because you'll feel better prepared for the interview. So that's my tip, just to keep a really good record of what you've been up to.
Fantastic.
Well, best of luck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good luck with everything.
This has been brilliant, and massive thank you to Sylvia and Kimbra for coming here today. And we've had a whopping 69. At one point there were 70 participants on this morning and lots of questions, so very positive webinar. So thank you both. Thank you, students, for coming today, and keep an eye out for messages from your careers coordinators about up and coming webinars on IT and digital and apprenticeships. And I'd just like to say have a lovely day, everybody, and see you all again soon.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thanks
Bye.
very much.